I think I always knew. Maybe not in clear, defined terms, but in quiet moments. The kind where no one's watching and your thoughts feel louder than the room around you. I must have been about 12 when I realized something about me didn't quite align with the world I lived in. While my classmates were crushing hard on the latest female pop stars or gushing about girls in our year, I found my eyes drawn elsewhere. It wasn't about copying someone's style or admiring their confidence. No. When I watched certain male actors on screen, something stirred in me. It was deeper than admiration. It was longing. Soft, confusing, silent yearning. But home wasn't a place where those kinds of feelings had room to breathe. My dad, especially, was firm in his view of what a normal boy should be. There wasn't a week that passed without him nudging, half joking, half serious. "Sam, have you got a girlfriend yet? You're getting behind, son." He'd laugh like it was harmless fun, but the weight of the questions settled in my chest each time. It wasn't just a joke. It was a script I was expected to follow. Our house wasn't cruel, but it wasn't soft either. It was structured, controlled. There were rules about how emotions should look, about what topics were okay at the dinner table, about how boys acted. There was no room for deviation, no room for me. School was better, at least on the surface. I had friends. We joked around, passed notes in class, complained about assignments. But even there, I felt like I was always one step removed. Like I was part of the group, but never truly inside it. My friends could share everything: crushes, secrets, weekend stories. I always held something back. I didn't want to lie, but telling the truth felt like stepping into open fire. It wasn't just fear of teasing. It was the kind of fear that sits in your bones. The fear that if people really knew you, they'd slowly step back. So I kept smiling. I played the part. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny, kept my gaze carefully neutral, and practiced hiding behind a version of myself that felt safer. The version who blended in. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't just hiding from the world. I was hiding from myself. Because naming what I felt, admitting it even silently, felt like lighting a fuse in a house full of locked doors. And yet, even then, buried under the fear and silence, something soft kept flickering inside me. A quiet knowing, a truth I couldn't yet say, but couldn't unfeel either. His name was Lucas. I first noticed him in biology class. Not because he said anything brilliant or insightful, but because he couldn't seem to stop talking. He had a talent for pushing our teacher's buttons without ever crossing the line. He'd ask questions with a mischievous tilt to his voice, the kind that made you wonder if he genuinely wanted to know the answer, or if he was just seeing how far he could stretch the moment before it snapped. The class usually groaned or rolled. Their eyes. I probably did too, at first. But then, one day, something small shifted. The teacher, worn down from weeks of Lucas's antics, cracked a reluctant smile. And just like that, Lucas disarmed the room with a laugh. Not mocking, not smug, but soft, genuine, a little self-aware. It caught me off guard. That laugh, that moment, stayed with me longer than I expected. After that, I started noticing him more. Not just in class, but in the hallways, the lunchroom, even during the sleepy early morning assemblies. He had this ease to him, a way of existing in the world that seemed completely unbothered. Where I was cautious, Lucas was bold. Where I shrank back, he leaned in. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. He didn't need to be. There was just something about him. The way he moved, the way he filled a space without trying. His smile lit up his whole face, and his eyes carried this spark like he was always in on some joke the rest of us had missed. At first, I told myself it was just admiration. Just the kind of person I wished I could be. But admiration doesn't usually make your heart race when someone walks into the room. It doesn't make you check your reflection twice or catch your breath when someone sits next to you. Something deeper was growing. Slow, quiet, and stubborn. Lucas wasn't just someone I noticed. He became the highlight of my day. The reason I paid more attention in biology. The reason I found myself drifting through the hallways a little slower, hoping I'd run into him. Even just a passing "hey" felt like something I could replay, later in my head. Of course, I tried to convince myself otherwise. I told myself it was just a phase, a schoolboy thing. I reminded myself of all the girls he smiled at, the easy way he flirted, the way his name came up in weekend gossip. Lucas was, well, Lucas. And I was just someone in the background. Still, I caught myself watching him. Not just the way his school blazer seemed made for him, but the little things too. How he rolled up his sleeves, revealing just enough forearm to make my chest flutter. How he ran his fingers through his hair absent-mindedly when he was lost in thought. The kind of things no one else would notice. But I always did. It wasn't just attraction. It was the way I felt seen around him, even when he wasn't looking directly at me. I knew I couldn't say anything. Not in a school where whispers traveled faster than truth. Not when I didn't even know what he'd think, or if he'd think about it at all. So I kept it to myself, tucked the feelings away like pages in a journal I never intended to open, in front of anyone. But he stayed in my thoughts. His smile, his voice, the way he walked like the world was his to enjoy, they all lingered. And somehow, quietly, a part of me hoped he'd notice me too. It started with mutual friends, the kind of group where no one really plans things, but somehow you all end up in the same place at the same time. Group lunches, study sessions that turned into pizza nights, awkward birthday parties with too much soda and not enough music. Lucas and I were just two people in the mix, at first. But slowly, almost without realizing it, we began orbiting closer. We'd end up sitting next to each other more often. If a group split into two cars, we were usually in the same one. If someone cracked a joke, we always seemed to look at each other first to see if the other was laughing. Our connection deepened gradually, like a string pulled tighter with every shared moment. It wasn't long before we started hanging out, just the two of us. At first it was casual, grabbing snacks after class, walking home together if our trains aligned. But soon, those small moments turned into long evenings. Late-night walks through quiet neighborhoods, half of our conversations wrapped in jokes, the other half slipping into something more honest. We'd sit on the swings in the park, or the curb outside the convenience store, talking about the stuff most people avoid. Family pressure, school stress, the fear of growing up and not knowing who you're supposed to be. We had our lighter moments, too. Hours spent gaming, throwing popcorn at each other during dumb movies, blasting music in his room while trying to one-up each other with the worst dance moves imaginable. We laughed so hard some nights we couldn't breathe. But it wasn't just the fun. It was how easy everything felt. With Lucas, I didn't have to keep my guard up. I could just exist. And that alone felt like something rare. Our physical closeness evolved in a way that was subtle, but electric. We'd bump shoulders on the couch and not pull away. He'd nudge me playfully during walks, and I'd pretend not to enjoy it as much as I did. One evening, we both reached for the same slice of pizza and ended up in a mock tug-of-war. When our hands finally touched, neither of us moved for a second too long. Then came the hugs. At first, they were those quick, one-arm guy-style pats, but slowly they lingered. Full embraces, two arms, no rush to let go. Sometimes his cheek would brush against mine, soft and warm, and I'd stand still afterward, trying to keep the feeling from fading. One night, during a movie marathon at his place, we ended up leaning against each other. His head rested against my shoulder, his legs stretched across the couch, touching mine. I didn't move. I barely breathed. It wasn't romantic in any loud, obvious way. But it was something. That night, I lay in bed replaying every second of it. The weight of his head, the softness of his breathing, the way his arm brushed against mine when he shifted slightly. All innocent. All devastating. Because the truth was, I wanted more. I wanted to reach out and hold his hand. I wanted to know what it would feel like to have him see me the way I saw him. Not just as a friend, but as someone who mattered in a different way. But I kept those feelings locked away. Because every time I started to wonder what if, reality reminded me just how much I had to lose, so I smiled, I laughed, I sat close when I could, and I cherished every moment like it was something sacred. He was my best friend, and I was falling for him. Quietly, painfully, completely. Once school began to take a back seat and routines loosened, our time together became something entirely our own. No longer confined to short walks between classes or crowded tables at lunch, Lucas and I started building a rhythm beyond the school walls, one that felt softer, slower, and strangely comforting. He'd come over to my place on weekends, sometimes unannounced, with snacks in hand and a lopsided grin like we'd already agreed it was a movie night. Other times, I'd end up at his, helping him cook questionable pasta recipes or debating which show to binge next while curled up on opposite ends of the same couch, though opposite grew closer with each visit. Sleepovers became a normal thing. We'd fall asleep mid-conversation, wake up to tangled blankets and sleepy eyes, then laugh about how late we stayed up. It was nothing out of the ordinary, at least not to anyone else. But to me, it felt like home. Not the physical space, but the comfort of being around someone who made the world feel less heavy. Still, there were moments. Small things I noticed that made my heart leap before I quickly told it to settle down. The way Lucas looked at me when I laughed too hard, not just amused but focused, like he was trying to memorize it. The way he'd sit closer than necessary on the couch or brush past me in the kitchen, a little too lightly to be accidental. How he'd casually toss an arm over my shoulder and then not move it, like we were built to fit like that. But then, the parties would happen. Someone would play music too loud, the living room would fill with bodies and red plastic cups, and Lucas, always the center of attention, would laugh a little louder, dance a little freer. And eventually, some girl would find her way to him. It wasn't hard. He had that charm that didn't ask permission, just opened doors. And I'd stand there, still smiling, still sipping whatever drink I had in hand, watching the night blur, as he flirted and leaned in close, whispered things that made them giggle. And each time, something inside me tightened, not out of jealousy, or maybe exactly that, but because those moments felt like tiny reminders that what we had, however warm or real, might never be what I was hoping for. I never said anything. I didn't want to ruin what we had by wishing it into something it wasn't, but one night, something shifted. We were walking back from one of those parties, both a little tired, the air crisp and quiet. The streets were mostly empty. At some point, without really thinking, he looped his arm through mine. It wasn't dramatic, just simple, steady. When we reached his front step, he paused before unlocking the door. We stood there in the silence, the porch light humming softly above us. Then he pulled me into a hug. Not the quick kind, the kind where you stay, where the world disappears a little. His arms around me were firm but gentle, like he needed it just as much as I did. I closed my eyes. I didn't want it to end. And just before he let go, he looked at me. Really looked. No words, no smile. Just eyes searching mine for something. It lasted a few seconds, maybe more. But in that gaze was something unspoken, something that felt dangerously close to hope. The day our final exams ended felt like shedding a second skin, one made of stress, late-night cramming, and constant pressure. It was the kind of day that carried a lightness in the air, like the whole world had finally exhaled with us. The bell rang for the last time, and suddenly, we weren't just students anymore. We were standing at the edge of something new. Naturally, the first person I wanted to see after our final paper was Lucas. And thankfully, he felt the same. We didn't make big plans. No parties, no groups, just him and me. A quiet celebration. We ended up at his house, the familiar space that had, over time, begun to feel like an extension of my own. His parents were out for the evening, and the house held that soft, rare silence that only comes in moments when the world forgets to be busy. Sunlight poured through the living room windows, painting warm golden patterns across the carpet and the walls. The air smelled faintly of citrus from an open bottle of cleaner left on the counter, mixing with the trace of his cologne that always seemed to linger on the furniture. He turned on some music, something mellow and wordless, and we collapsed onto the floor, backs against the couch, legs sprawled out in front of us. We each had a drink in hand, but not enough to blur the edges, just enough to warm the space between our words and make laughter come a little easier. We talked about everything and nothing. How strange it felt to be done, what we might do next, the best and worst teachers, the dumbest things we wrote in panic during exams. We laughed until our faces hurt. Eventually, our conversation faded into silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that feels earned, like a pause between songs you both know the lyrics to. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but at some point Lucas leaned into me, his shoulder brushing mine. I didn't move away. His presence was grounding, his nearness steady. We sat like that for a long moment, our arms lightly touching, our heads tilted back against the edge of the sofa, gazing up at nothing in particular. And then, maybe because the music had softened, or the sunlight had shifted, or the day had worn us down in the best way, he turned toward me, and I felt his hand slip gently around my back. We hugged. But this one was different. It wasn't rushed or casual. It was slow and deliberate, his arms wrapping around me fully, pulling me into his warmth. My head rested naturally against his chest, and I could feel his breathing. Steady at first, then slowing, like the rhythm of the moment was calming us both. His chin rested lightly near the side of my head. We said nothing. I closed my eyes. The world faded. There was only the weight of his arms, the quiet hum of the music, and the gentle warmth that passed between our skin like some unspoken language. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. We stayed like that, suspended in time, wrapped in something deeper than friendship, but not yet fully spoken. Then, gently, I felt him shift. One of his hands moved up, brushing softly against the back of my neck. The other held my side, fingers pressing lightly through the fabric of my shirt. I felt my heart start to race. Not from panic, but from possibility. And then, we moved. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Just enough. Our foreheads touched, a soft press of skin to skin. His eyes met mine. Calm, searching, and close. He was so near I could feel the warmth of his breath on my lips, the stillness of the room pressing in around us like a held breath, the kind of silence that only happens when two people are on the edge of something they both secretly wanted, but were too afraid to name. Then, softly, slowly, he kissed me. It wasn't dramatic. No fireworks, no music swell. Just the gentle press of his lips against mine, warm, hesitant, and impossibly real. His hand stayed at my back, grounding me. My eyes fluttered closed as I leaned in just enough to let him know I was still there, that I wanted this too. The kiss was brief, but it said everything. When we finally pulled back, we didn't speak. We didn't need to. We stayed there. Foreheads still touching, hands still clasped, hearts quietly racing together. In that moment, the silence between us was louder than any confession could ever be. It carried all the things we'd never said, and all the things we didn't have to. The next morning, I half expected the weight of reality to come crashing down. I braced for awkward silence, the kind that follows moments you're not sure actually happened, or weren't supposed to. But it never came. Instead, I woke up to a message from Lucas. It was simple. A blurry picture of his dog sprawled across the couch with the caption, "He misses you already. Me too. But don't tell him that." I laughed out loud in bed. Warmth blooming in my chest. We messaged back and forth all morning, our usual rhythm unchanged but with something softer threaded through the banter. We joked about how much junk we ate, how sore we were from sitting on the floor too long, how bad his playlist actually was. But under it all was a quiet current of understanding, a new closeness we didn't need to name. When we met up again, later that week, it felt like slipping back into something that had always been waiting for us. There was no grand talk, no "what does this mean" moment, just a continuation. Like we both knew what had shifted and silently agreed not to question it too hard. And in that space, something beautiful grew. We became more open. Not in public displays or labels, but in the way we allowed ourselves to show affection. He'd rest his head on my shoulder during movies now, not caring if anyone else in the room noticed. I'd bump into him on purpose just to feel his arm press back against mine. We teased each other like always, but there was a new warmth underneath it, a sense of safety I hadn't realized I'd been craving. I started to feel something I never had before, seen. Not just tolerated or liked, truly seen. And not just for what I said or how I acted, but for who I was beneath all of it. Lucas hadn't changed overnight. He didn't wake up and suddenly stop flirting with girls or declare anything new about himself. But when we were together, it felt like none of that mattered. What we had existed outside of definitions, outside of expectations, it just was. He never shied away from me. He didn't flinch if I reached for his hand when no one was looking, didn't question the way we leaned into each other when we talked. He didn't need to explain, and I didn't need to ask. We were building something that didn't need to be declared out loud to be real. It felt like we'd carved out a tiny space in the world that was just ours, untouched by the noise outside, free from the pressure to be anything but honest. No more second-guessing. No more wondering if I was imagining things. For the first time, I could simply be. And he was right there beside me, not as an idea or a dream or a question mark, but as something solid, something quietly certain. We hadn't labeled it. We probably wouldn't. But whatever this was, it was real. It was enough. And it was ours. There's a kind of peace that comes not from getting everything you ever wanted, but from finally letting go of the fear that you never would. That's what being with Lucas felt like. For so long, I'd grown used to keeping parts of myself hidden, tucked away behind carefully crafted smiles, rehearsed deflections, and a quiet hope I never dared speak out loud. I had taught myself not to reach too far, not to want too much, because what if the world reached back with rejection? But now, I didn't have to reach. He was already there. Not perfectly. Not with all the answers. But with presence. With warmth. With this calm, steady kind of closeness that made everything else, the noise, the fear, the years of waiting, feel smaller. We never had the talk. Never sat down to define what we were. We didn't need to. Because the way he looked at me when I walked into the room, the way his fingers would find mine when we sat too close on the train, or how he'd lean into me during late-night reruns of shows we'd seen a dozen times, all of it said what words couldn't. We held hands more often now, not just in private, but in the softest, most natural moments, when we crossed the street, or when he was mid-story and didn't want to let go. He'd smile without saying anything, just a quick glance like, yeah, I'm still here. And we stopped needing excuses to see each other. No more, I'm just dropping something off, or I need help with notes. Now it was just, come, over. Or sometimes just showing up, knowing the door would open. The world outside didn't change. People still asked questions. Some still made assumptions. There were still moments when I caught a glance that lingered too long, or a comment that felt just a little too pointed, but the difference was, it didn't matter the same way anymore because I wasn't standing on the edge of something, hoping to be invited in. I wasn't guessing, waiting, wondering. I was in it, fully, quietly, completely, with him, and that changed everything. There's something powerful about being known. Not the version you edit, but the full, honest, messy version. The one who laughs too loudly sometimes, who overthinks everything, who gets scared and hopeful in the same breath. Lucas saw that version of me, and he stayed. That's not just love. That's belonging. It's the freedom to exhale. The safety of silence that doesn't demand explanation. The comfort of being held without needing to ask. I don't know where we'll go from here. I don't need to. What we have isn't fragile. It's not loud. It's steady. And as I walk forward into whatever tomorrow brings, into the unknown, the unpredictable, I do so with his hand in mine. No longer alone, not hoping, just home.